So now like to turn our attention to our panelists, and I'm going to pass the proverbial microphone here in just a moment. But I just want to say thank you so much, Father Daniel Griffith, who's with us. He's the Wenger Family Fellow of Law and founding director of the Initiative on Restorative Justice and Healing at the University of St. Thomas School of Law in Minnesota. He is also the liaison for healing and restorative justice for the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis. Christian Santamaria serves as the director of the university ministry at the University of San Diego. And Lisa Stodhoff is the chief operating officer and dean of the college at Donnelly College in Kansas City, Kansas. So thank you for the three of you so much for joining us today and for bringing your wisdom and curiosity to this conversation about mission and restorative justice. And I wonder if I could just invite each of you just to briefly introduce yourselves, with your names, if you have pronouns that you prefer, a little bit about your institution, and then just to say a little bit about what's brought you to restorative justice work. And so maybe I will, would someone like to go first of the three?
I'll go first.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Lisa Stodhoff. I'm the dean of the college at Donnelly. We are in Kansas City, Kansas, right in the urban core. Very impoverished area. We serve first generation, 71% first generation college students, Hispanic serving institution, minority serving institution. And my journey with restorative justice just began in September. It was always a dream of mine to link our mission statement with something that was more tangible, and fortunate enough to just be finishing up the program at University of San Diego under David Karp, and just a real passion, and hopefully I can share some of what I've learned today. And thank you for having me.
Great. I'll go next. Dan Griffith here. Really happy to be with all of you. And, just a shout out to the Restorative Justice Network of Catholic Campuses, University of San Diego, and of course, Sheila as our moderator. I got into restorative justice, so I'm a priest of the Archdiocese. I'll celebrate 20 years, May 25th. Was ordained at the height of the clergy abuse scandal. And so that has been part of what my ministry has entailed. I was delegate for safe environment for the Archdiocese at a time of real harm in the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis. And it was through that work that I really started to get into restorative justice, was introduced to Janine Geske, who's a pioneer in this field. And our Archdiocese was criminally charged by Ramsey County, where St. Paul is. And the county attorney is an innovator nationally and decided to have a restorative justice provision put in the settlement agreement. And so 6 years ago, that really opened up a pathway for restorative justice, not only in the Archdiocese, but St. Thomas University. Our Archbishop Hebdo, who's a wonderful shepherd, really was open in promoting of restorative justice and restorative practices in healing the harm of clergy abuse and also peripheral harm for Catholics. And then our university, somebody mentioned Santa Clara. You're getting a very, very good president July 1st. Dr. Julie Sullivan, who's our president, will be the president of Santa Clara. She and Dean Rob Vischer, very, very supportive of restorative justice work. So just discerned a further call into that area. And so we launched last September with my colleague Julie Craven and Hank Shea, a new initiative. So really humbled and honored to be in this work and heartened to be on the healing side of the important response to harm.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christian Santamaria. I'm the director of university ministry here at the University of San Diego. I've been a campus minister now for about 11 years. And what brought me to restorative justice actually was a question I brought into grad school about what really is forgiveness and what really is reconciliation, and what does that actually look like in terms of accompanying students and accompanying a community when harm is done. And so that led me to kind of looking at restorative justice. And for me, the application of how that fits into a ministerial praxis, particularly in college higher ed, And so it's really great to be here and to learn from everyone here and from our experiences of how we can continue to be a place of healing and transformation through this practice that we call restorative justice.
Thank you so much all for your introductions. And I'll just put a little side note in about logistics about folks should be able to post questions in the chat, and those will go to Gwen Alexander, she's with me in the background doing her magic. And so please feel free as we're going throughout the conversation today. We will have some polling questions, and then toward the end, we'll have additional opportunities to chat, to post in the open chat as well. So we do want to be able to have some time for questions after the questions that we've developed as a result of our preparations together. So Gwen, does that sound good? We're working, okay, all right, excellent. So as I said, we met beforehand to kind of prepare several weeks ago for this conversation, and part of what came to the foreground, and as you just heard in the introductions, there's quite a breadth of experience, and these colleagues of ours are really been thinking deeply about not just questions about the themes of mission and identity and RJ, but also thinking about things like forgiveness and how do we do this work in the world in a way of integrity. So I just wanted to start out by sort of thinking about our container, building our container a little bit, and just inviting each of you just to talk a little bit about your sort of own university's Catholic mission and identity. And then maybe just thinking about what does it mean to be mission driven in the context of your institution. And this is just sort of a point of entry for us to be thinking about how do we connect mission and restorative practice. And then I'm going to also post in the chat as people are preparing the responses to me, a resource that we have from the RJNCC, our colleague, Susan Sharp, wrote a really interesting white paper connecting restorative justice and the Catholic social tradition. So I'm going to post that as a resource for the folks who are joining us today. And then just again, invite the three of you just to say a little bit, each of you, about your own institution's mission as a Catholic institution, and then thinking about, what does it mean to be mission driven in the context of your particular community. And I don't know if we want to keep the same order, or I see maybe Christian unmuted, so.
Go ahead. Yeah, we could, let's go with the same order. That would be great.
Okay. Sure. So at Donnelly College, two key phrases of our mission statement. One is to continue the mission of Jesus Christ in our time by making the love of God tangible in our world. And then the second part of it is that we are also concerned for the personal needs of our students, especially those who might not otherwise be served. And so the tangible and serving those who might not otherwise be served, this is where we tie mission into our restorative justice practices. So what do we mean by that? Well, we offer an associate degree at Lansing Correctional Facility. Right? We've been out there for 20 years. So being in the prison system, we teach our adjuncts that prison is the punishment. There's no need to punish the students further, and we want to educate them and serve them. We have a campus covered, as I'm sure many of you do, at Catholic campuses and campuses all over the United States, really serving the needs of our students. We offer a daytime nursing cohort for the Sisters Servant of Mary. Their ministry is to administer the sick at night so their family members can have some respite time. And they're trained as nurses, so we started a second cohort for them during the day so we could serve them. Again, making the love of God tangible. We have instituted a block schedule here at the college so that students have Fridays off. They take classes Monday through Thursday, and Friday is their day off to work, so they don't have to worry about working and going to school. And we also take their status as first generation very seriously. In fact, last year we started a web page of our own faculty and staff who were also first generation as a resource. And we put pictures up there and contact information so that our students know who to turn to in case they do have questions as a first generation college student. So anything that we can do here on campus to serving our students and making that love of God tangible in their world is really important to us. So we look back at our mission statement, not just because Higher Learning Commission tells us to do so, but we make sure that strategically are we working with our students to make that a reality.
So that's great. It's wonderful to hear all the ideas and the great work that's being done. St. Thomas University began as a diocesan university, so it's somewhat unusual in the country. A lot of Catholic universities, as we know, were founded by orders. And so sometimes our mission, we have to really dig deep, either into St. Thomas Aquinas and his faith and reason that was so much a part of his thought, or our founding Archbishop John Ireland, who really wanted to educate first generation American immigrants. That was an important mission of the university historically. The mission is this: inspired by the Catholic intellectual tradition, St. Thomas educates students to be morally responsible leaders who think critically, act wisely, and work skillfully to advance the common good. I was when Lisa talked about to make it tangible. Those words, I think those words convey the tangible nature of the mission. The common good, as we know in the Catholic social tradition, is the sum total of conditions. This comes from Vatican II, that really promotes individual and collective flourishing. So when we look at education, we're saying, okay, how can we educate students to be morally responsible so that they can foster the common good? I think what we've seen, and the paper that was referenced does a great job in this, is the powerful alignment and dynamism of restorative justice and Catholic social teaching. They really fit hand in glove because they're both oriented to human flourishing. So one of the ways that we try to do that at our law school is we really try to get to know the students. We ask them about their stories. In a new restorative justice course that I teach with Hank Shea and now Julie Craven, we really get into the question of, through circle experiences, not only starting off with what's your perfect day, what does it look like, but then sometimes students bring for the very first time something that they've never talked about, that they've never told anybody. And so our law school does a good job on quality of student life. We're in the top 5, and I'm not bragging about that, but it's part of an intentionality in terms of really trying to meet students where they are and learn who they are. And I think it fits really well with the restorative practices that are part of the movement.
For us here at University of San Diego, maybe I'll start first with reading our mission. The University of San Diego is a Roman Catholic institution committed to the advancing academic excellence and expanding liberal and professional knowledge, creating a diverse and inclusive community, and preparing leaders who are dedicated to the ethical conduct and compassionate service. I think this is a mission statement that's very much alive here at USD. However, I think our vision statement is actually probably what's most talked about here at USD, which reads this: that we set the standard for an engaged contemporary Catholic university where innovative change makers confront humanity's urgent challenges. And I think that phrase, change makers confronting humanity's urgent challenges, really animates the work here at USD. What I'm drawn to in this statement is the word confront. It sounds kind of, it could be kind of like a somewhat abrasive. It can, what do we mean by confront? But when I hear that word, I think of a word that it calls us to transform, rooted much like in Vatican II, that we as a Catholic institution isn't like the ship that's going to provide salvation, but we are called as people to enter into the world, to confront these needs and hopefully manage or alleviate some of these challenges. And if that's true, what I think is helpful is that the spiritual tradition of the Catholic faith invites us to recognize that for any transformation to happen, space is necessary, a space for that transformation to occur. And I think this is where there's alignment between restorative justice and Catholic institutions. Is that I think what I hear a lot in not just ours, but many others. This is my 4th Catholic institution I worked at. There's always this push for students to engage and to go out into the world. But what's helpful, and I think what makes Catholic education distinct, is the means and the way in which that approach takes place. And I think the desire of the Catholic spiritual tradition to form students in this way and the practices of restorative justice really allow these two things to be aligned together. in a particular way, how this has looked here at USD. We just finished our synod listening sessions, in which a lot of really difficult experiences of the church came to the fore. In fact, if I'm going to be honest, after listening to some of those responses, one of humanity's urgent challenges is the church. How do we navigate this? How does it become a place again that is alive and life-giving to many people? And we found that the process of restorative justice not only allowed people to name the challenges that they face or the hurt that they experience with the church, but all of them, in one way or another, recorded some sense of hope that this even happened. That the church could actually be a place that is life-giving simply by giving space to the reality of where hurt and healing is necessary. So that's all to say is, yes, we have a mission. It's very much alive here. And this restorative justice practice has been really helpful for us here at the university.
Yeah, so you each responded really beautifully. I think you even went further than my initial question, right? So helpful to hear. And again, just inviting the folks who are on the call today, also just if you have a moment, you're on your screen, you can call up your institutional mission, right? Like, what is true for each of us in terms of what we're called to in our the particularities, right, of our own institutions, the larger framing of, Catholic identities. And then what also has my attention is that each of you also really spoke to not just the mission, but then how you really a little bit see it connected to restorative work. And so Lisa, you talked about thinking about how you're making God's love tangible in your community, on the campus, but also in the local prisons, other places in your community. Dan, you really spoke beautifully about the common good and thinking about, how do we sort of, as part of, the Catholic social tradition, as part of our missions, and also in part of restorative work, support individual and collective human flourishing. And also that I heard in there, the importance of relationships, right? Like and that restorative practices can be a way to help us to build meaningful relationships with our students and other folks in our community. And that, Christian, you also just spoke about the practices of RJ as being able to embody, practices of the mission. So I'm gonna post in the chat. I'm gonna invite people to respond to the sort of follow-up. I'm just gonna do one more sweep through the three of you, but I just invite those on the call who are listening today to also say a little bit in the chat, to post a little bit about, when you think about restorative justice work on your campus, what kinds of mission supported RJ work, whether it's teaching, thinking, action, service, are you seeing happen on your respective campuses? And as I said, the panelists, you each kind of touched upon this, and I just want to go another round on this just to see if there's anything else that comes to mind or that you wanted to offer, because I think this is a wonderful opportunity for people to hear, right? What are other campuses doing, right, in terms of thinking about this intersection between aspects of the mission and identity, and also the restorative work that's being done on a given campus?
Yeah, so I like what Christian just shared with us about the vision and the values, and our values at Donnelly are community, truth, and excellence. And we start with community. Now, Kansas City, Kansas, not only is it an impoverished urban core, but we have probably one of the highest homicide rates in the Midwest. And so we're always trying to build that sense of community on our campus right from the start. So the Saturday before fall classes start, all first-time, full-time students come onto campus, and we do a civic engagement. So they meet their instructors, staff, faculty. It's actually in our faculty contracts that everyone has to participate. And we're trying to build that sense of community. So before the first day of classes, we set the tone that this is who we are and this is what we do. And we cohort the students, and we go out into the community, and we partake in a civic engagement. We paint churches, and we weed the garden of convents, and we help out at soup kitchens, and we work in the food pantries, wherever we're needed. So we're setting that tone from the beginning. Again, we're trying to teach our students not to be retributive, but to repair harm and build a sense of community. So that is how we start our academic year.
A couple of things come to mind. Christian's comment about providing a space, and also the the ability to confront either harm or injustice. Another way that I think Catholic social teaching and the intellectual tradition really aligns, and the biblical justice tradition aligns with RJ, is the naming of harm, prophetically calling it out in a way that's inclusive and onto healing, but also in a way that seeks justice. The Hebrew scripture prophets were oriented to bringing people back into fidelity by naming the harm. And so I think that aligns beautifully with RJ. Two things from our university that come to mind. One is we're going to launch in fall an RJ working group of both faculty and staff who are interested. And it's going to be broadly disseminated to the university. It'll be co-sponsored with the Office of Mission and our initiative on restorative justice and healing at the law school. And we're excited about that. Just like today's call, all of the ideas and the synergy that happens when people come together, of like mind and value, it can be really powerful. And then secondly, I would just note that after the killing of George Floyd, Minneapolis, St. Paul is very much a ground zero, and Minnesota has sadly, some of the most acute disparities when it comes to race in the country across a whole host of categories. So one of the things that we're doing is a week from today, we're hosting, it's called Justice and Healing, and it's going to be, there'll be a link, so it'll be live streamed as well, and we'll get it to Gwen to see if she can extend it to our group. But it's called Justice and Healing for a Wounded Community, a conversation with civic and religious leaders. And so that's one of the ways I think Catholic universities and colleges can really be helpful, is providing forums for these conversations and engaging our communities really, and come at it not only from our own perspective, but invite perspectives of different religious leaders and civic leaders. What's happening that is our signs of light? What needs to happen further in our community? So our university is really engaged with the broader community in a way that I think is helpful.
One thing I would say about restorative justice and the ways it aligns with Catholic mission, and particularly the university's role within society, it's an understanding of how RJ can be a contemplative practice. And I want to define some pieces here. After hearing Father Daniel speak about, there's a lot of racial injustice and there's violence that's happening in our world today. People are getting hurt. People are getting further marginalized, what have you. And to think that the need is to contemplate can sometimes be a kind of a jarring idea. Maybe there's an assumption that it means that we're not going to do anything, that we're going to think about things longer, or that it might be otherworldly, or if it's a particular praxis for people who are pious or particularly religious. But there's a really great definition of contemplation by a priest named Walter Burkhart from Georgetown, who talks about contemplation as a long and loving look at the real. And I think that's a very helpful understanding of contemplation and why restorative justice is helpful for us in Catholic universities to understand how the Catholic spiritual tradition might inform our response to the complexity of the world. Is that restorative justice creates the space for transformation, yes, for recognizing wrongs, yes, but it is inherently a contemplative one. It is one that is creating and recognizing that people aren't, the worst thing that they've ever done. And we're taking a long and loving look at their story, the stories of those who've been affected, the story of the community that has had to hold this. It's a loving response to something that can easily be responded to with a knee-jerk reaction of retributive justice or some sort of punishment. We're actually creating the space with restorative justice between a stimulus and a response to actually understand the complexity of people's stories. Goodness, if there isn't a need for that in our world today, if there isn't a need for that in our own spiritual lives today, this kind of contemplative response, what I think restorative justice provides is it provides a social, it's a social response to a socially contemplative response, not necessarily a personal one, that actually does address the needs that we have while not moving so quickly to easier responses that might not necessarily lead toward justice.
Thank you so much, Christian. And I'm just sitting with what each of you have just shared, and just wanting to pause, because I think what Christian is raising around the opportunity, right, for contemplation, for action that has contemplative response at its core, and restorative work, you know, in terms of thinking about the healing work that needs to be done. And my father, Dan, was describing, you know, in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, thinking, you know, about how, you know, or the question, I guess, of what can we offer, right, in terms of creating spaces, not just within our own universities, but also in our communities, and to engage across lines of communication that might not often be open. And what is it like to open up those spaces for conversation, and how do we build, you know, restorative containers that are deep enough to hold all of the pain that people understandably would be bringing forth when those kinds of invitations are made and conversations are raised. So I just want to pause with that for a moment. And I'm seeing in the chat, and I'm appreciating, one of our participants today had asked me if we could pause also, just to give people an opportunity to offer their own reflections, as I had posted in the chat, the question of, you know, what kinds of mission supported restorative teaching and thinking and actions are our participants seeing happen on their campuses today? So I just want to both, again, extend an invitation to our participants to respond to that question in the chat. And I see it, and Dan, your colleague Julie Craven is posting in the chat, which is wonderful. Thank you so much, Julie, for posting the information about the conversation with civic and religious leaders. And some things, I think, if you need me to repost, some things I think only the two of us can see. So if that's the case, just let me know that. And then Julia Wade is at LMU. Thank you, Julia, for talking about just the ongoing staff work. So engaging colleagues in circle practice, engaging in conversations about race and identity, and collaborations across departments that are engaged in justice work. So how important even those conversations are, right? That sometimes our restorative work even is not connected. It's not always contemplative in the sense of building community and communicating across different spaces on campuses, even our own campuses where the work is being done. And the conversation too about implementing an RJ process, right, that's part of student conduct. So thinking about how do we sort of, again, create that space between stimulus and response, and to support our students in being able to do that together and with each other. Thinking about this around processes like Title IX, concerns about sexual violence. And yeah, thank you so much. These responses are wonderful. So I just want to check in again with the panelists. As you're hearing some of these responses, you know, one of the things that we had spoken about in our preparation was this idea, right, of a Catholic, you know, not a singular, but Catholic imagination, broadly writ, as something, right, that makes restorative work meaningful, helpful, possible on your campus. And so just hearing some of the conversation in the chat about the kinds of restorative work that people are doing on their campuses, I just wonder to hear from the three of you a little bit about, you know, what are the things that you think are distinctive about Catholic imagination that make the RJ work possible on your campus?
So I think Donnelly is unique in that we are a commuter campus. We don't have residence halls and dining halls, so we don't have some of the other issues that larger colleges have. But we start, again, Catholic imagination. we assume integrity of all our students. We don't have security guards on campus. We don't have metal detectors. We are right smack dab in the urban core of Kansas City, Kansas. But we make the college a place of love for all God's creatures, knowing that they're made in the image and likeness of God. And we don't ask our students, perhaps when they come in, and I can't tell you how many shirts I see in memoriam of that, how many of their friends and relatives have been victims to harm. We teach our students, to ask questions and to build community and to use their Catholic knowledge and not say to the offenders, what's wrong with you? Why did you do this? But as Jesus would say, what's happened to you and how can my love and forgiveness heal you? Similar to what we would see in sacrament of confession. So, sometimes we use restorative justice for plagiarism cases. We really sit with the student, talk to them, but we take each instance of harm here on campus and address it from a place of love, from a real Catholic lens for love for our students. So a little bit unique in our perspective.
I loved this question. I think it's something that unites us all on this call. The Catholic imagination, which is really as universal as the mission, and it's daring, and I think it's rooted in spiritual freedom. So the idea of following the Spirit, discerning the Spirit, as Christian was talking about, the importance of contemplation. It's something that Pope Francis has modeled for the Universal Church. And one of the things that I think is really important is that we have to make sure, if we are talking about justice in our universities, in our dioceses, among Catholic leaders, that we are doing everything we can to live up to it. And I think we've got a long way to go in that. Christian, again, had referenced those conversations among Catholics, and we've had those in the Archdiocese, and they're challenging, but they're important because they're coming from a place of truth and sometimes hurt. So I think the Catholic imagination also really fosters a unity of knowledge, not only unity of faith and reason, but unity of knowledge across disciplines. It's interdisciplinary. I'm also reminded of Pope Francis saying in a very important way that the first proclamation is the saving love and mercy of God. And he said, for the last number of years, we inverted the order. We got to the do's and don'ts and the moral teachings, which are not unimportant. But the first proclamation is the saving love and mercy of God. And I think the Catholic imagination, through all of the great artists and writers and painters and sculptors and all that have really kind of held that and disseminated that Catholic culture, really, I think, express the goodness, beauty, and truth that comes from God. And I think that aligns with restorative practices in a beautiful way. Narrative is important in terms of the Catholic imagination, and that's so much a part of RJ. The importance of redemption. One thinks of the writing of Flannery O'Connor and others. There's often that redemptive theme. And so finally, I would just say the idea of not remaining in our grooves. I think those who work in the university setting, we can become groove runners, even if the groove isn't producing good outcomes. And I think a Catholic imagination that's free and really open to the Spirit can lead us to discern what can be that we're not doing. What can we try? And to hear and read in the chat all of the things that you're all doing, I think that's inspired by a Catholic imagination, which unites all of us.
I'm just grateful to be part of the two who have shared already. It's been so much wisdom here. I think when I think of Catholic imagination, I think I have to somewhat create some distinction. What do we mean by imagination? Are we talking about fantasy? Like, are we talking about dragons and things like that? Or like, what is imagination? Sharon Parks has a great definition, and I'm paraphrasing here. It's the ability to conceive what could actually happen, an ability to conceive what could happen in reality. So when we talk about a Catholic imagination, it's this freedom to, what Father Daniel is talking about, is a freedom to really consider, given the abundant love and grace of God, what could actually happen? And so when you think of a term, when you think of restorative justice and you think of a term like mercy, it requires imagination. A definition of mercy that's helpful for me, the willingness to enter into the chaos of another. Goodness, if I don't come into that with imagination, with the ability to recognize that someone's worst day isn't their definition, but to enter into the chaos of that person, to understand their story, what has led them to the decisions, what past hurts they might be experiencing or have felt in the past. Goodness, that it requires us to conceive something beyond just the surface that we're seeing in a person's actions or in a community's actions, to actually look at what's underneath that. In addition to why imagination is helpful and why it's necessary for restorative justice and its alignment with Catholic imagination, I think that's what we need. I think that when I think of why restorative justice might have come to surface is because there was an imagination of thinking that there's got to be a better way than just punishing people more, because that doesn't seem to be working. So someone had the imagination to conceive of like what needs to happen so actual healing can occur. Goodness, if that's possible, then it's a really great place for hope. Not optimism, but true hope that, wow, healing can actually come, that people can actually be heard, that reconciliation can be something that we as a community can participate in. I think of the Jesuits in El Salvador during the 1980s, who during a very tumultuous time in the country where there was a civil war happening and there was a major strife between the rich and the poor, that the role of the university that they saw it as is a place for this reconciliation, this place for healing, this place for hope. I don't think we find ourselves in unfamiliar times to them. I think we find ourselves also in times of great polarization, of a desire to be more retributive and right than loving, compassionate, or merciful. And so if there's an alternative imagination that a Catholic institution can provide, I think restorative justice might have a role in positing that a new way, a different way, a third way of approaching the very complex issues that we face as a society.
Thank you all so much. And thank you, Christian. Thinking about just the conversation we had in preparation for today and just the Catholic imagination. And I, just for all of our guests, I appreciate that Christian started by sort of opening up the question about, what is a Catholic imagination? And I think as somebody who I consider myself respectfully a Catholic in recovery, I was raised Catholic and went to divinity school in Boston at the time of the sexual abuse crisis in the Catholic Church. So I'm really appreciating this conversation, Dan, also on a personal level. But I just want to say for all of the participants today that this are, the idea, right, of Catholic as universal. So I don't want to suggest that if people in the audience are who are participating say are not specifically identified as a Catholic, practicing Catholic, that this imagination does not include you. So it's I think something for everyone. I think that's part of what is so powerful about the conversation again that we had in preparing for today, and what I'm also hearing you all say. Lisa's very clear conversation about being a place of love, right, and coming from a place of love when we're responding to the people around us. And Dan, I think you talked about these themes around narrative, around redemption. And I love the image of not remaining in our grooves, right? That there can be a lot of pressure, I think, institutionally, right, to just keep doing the same thing over and over again, right? Even if we don't see the outcomes that we long for, which could potentially be the definition of insanity. But nonetheless, just that there's a the imagination, right, is a way to free ourselves from those. And then again, Christian, I think just the idea of being in community and being heard, and the idea of being able to witness, to be witnessed and to witness others, right, in the pain that's present, and also in the opportunity for healing, for connection, and for relationship, for being known and loved just as we are. So thank you all for that. Really rich. You've given us a lot to think about. And there's so many directions that we could go in. I do just want to follow up, because I know, Christian, you had shared, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I am just going to ask you this, and then you can respond or decline. When we had our prep conversation, we were talking about what is it, that RJ can help Catholic campuses to do in terms of thinking about our mission and identity, but also as a way of holding space for sort of the stuff that we don't want to see or contend with or look at. And you had sort of given the analogy of John's gospel. And I just wonder if you would share that with the folks who are here gathered today. Thank you.
Sure, happy to. First, I want to say there are many people on this call who are at USD who are very much engaged in this RJ work here, and who have actually offered trainings every year for a lot of our staff and faculty to actually be trained as RJ practitioners, so to speak. So for their work, who are in the room, I'm grateful because I'm a beneficiary of it. And part of why I brought up what I said, there's a particular moment in the Gospel of John. It's the foot washing. It's in that gospel, there is no depiction of Jesus actually breaking bread. There's this depiction where Jesus is washing the feet of the disciples. And when I think of restorative justice, I think of this passage, because if I'm going to take you back to, Jesus times, where they were in Birkenstocks all day, what I'm saying? It's just like gross feet, hair. We're talking about vulnerability and things that are likely parts of ourselves that don't want to be seen. In fact, in that time, it would likely be slaves who would probably be the one to wash feet. It would not be, it's not a distinguished task. And yet there's this moment where Jesus washes the feet of his disciples. This moment that is less about, perfection and more about the awkwardness of having to be seen, the awkwardness of not being able to hide your story, the awkwardness of someone willing to receive that story honestly, in the context of community. What I think is incredibly powerful about that is if it does take the place of what it means to be in communion in the Gospel of John, if there isn't the bread of life discourse there, and in the Gospel of John that's happening, what is that trying to tell us? That there is a social impact to what it means to be in communion with one another. And it's not just times where it's joyful or easy to be with one another. It's also when it's awkward. It's also when we have to see each other, when we'd rather not have to show our feet or show our parts of ourselves that we don't want to be seen. Or better yet, that's what's required when there's parts of our community that we'd rather not remember or we'd rather not look at. Sheila, you've been using this language, and I think it's used also in the training for restorative justice. Is it possible that the Catholic University can create a container for this type of honesty, vulnerability, and subsequently healing, mercy, and forgiveness? I think that's the task. When I think what wakes me up every day and makes me want to work at a Catholic institution and do the work that I do, it's the possibility that this work could happen. That a container could be created that can actually make impact on how we are peacemakers in the world. Last piece, why I think this is important. Catholics are known for a lot of things, and often it's not that. And I think there's a lot of work, and I'm going to use a word here of sharing the source of our joy, evangelization, sharing the source of the joy of what it means to be a Catholic institution, is to start doing some of those things that actually allow people to recognize, like, oh, wow, that I recognize that as Catholic University. That's a place of healing. That's a place where that container is being built. I think it would do us well as institutions to be an institution that does that in society, to be this place where a location in which honesty and truth become the doorway to healing and forgiveness. What an impact.
Very inspiring. I just have a couple of thoughts. I think the challenge is that we're, again, according to Catholic teaching, but we all feel it, is we're wounded by original sin. Sometimes we're wounded by our own self-inflicted wounds. And so there is a desire to hide, to sweep under the rug, to turn away. And I think what Christian is talking about is really, using the RJ values and also our deeply rooted biblical narrative and values to really overcome that. And I think the Catholic University setting can be that place. But it also requires all of us to be vulnerable and to get over the uncomfortableness of challenging conversations. One of the things that I've said as a pastor is we're not a dysfunctional family. We're going to talk about difficult issues. And I think the Catholic University setting can be that place as well, a place of light and a place of healing that comes from those hard conversations that are rooted in love and our shared humanity and our shared values. And I thank Christian and Lisa and others for just their inspiring stories about where that can happen.
Thank you so much. I'll just pause and check in with Lisa. Did you want to respond at all to that? And if you do, it's great. And if you don't, I'll.
I do. I agree that students on campus need to see that we also are vulnerable. I think the assumption from some of our students, because we're a Catholic college and perhaps maybe they're falling away, especially the college age student, that says, oh, you're going to daily mass and our chapel is right near our front doors and you're trying to be a saint. No, I go to mass because I'm a sinner and Lord, I'm not worthy that you should enter under my roof. So we have to show our vulnerability to our students as well. And that sin is sin. My sin is not the same as your sin, but sin is sin. So we all have to offer our vulnerability up to our students so that, again, forming a sense of community that we're all going towards a common purpose in life and for healing and forgiveness. So I think it starts with our actions every day on a college campus.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I'm not doing a fantastic job checking the chat, but I'm just wanting to make a note and appreciate just the resonance, I think, of some of the items that are coming in the chat, and thinking about this idea of where are the spaces and places where transformation is already happening. And Gwen, I just wanted to lift up what you had shared about the American Society of Criminology and Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences, and thinking about, moving to a restorative model of a world without prisons, and just how powerful, again, in terms of thinking about the role of imagination and the ability to imagine a world that's different than the one that we have, and then how do we walk toward that together. I think among each of our panelists, you've touched on the sort of question of what can get in the way of that imagination, and I just wanted to do another sweep around specifically on that question, which we sort of talked about when we were preparing, is just thinking about challenges when you're thinking about doing RJ work on your campus. And one of the particular things that had come up was sort of trying to navigate things like positional authority and sort of other sort of interesting aspects or aspects that I don't mean are peculiar like odd, but peculiar meaning particular to some Catholic institutions. And of course, I was educated by the Jesuits. So, St. Ignatius was in the army before he founded the order, right? And so a Jesuit said to me, well, it's kind of like the army. I mean, the president's the general. And so we're eventually going to march in that direction, even if you hear a lot of, yelling behind closed doors. And they lived in St. Mary's Hall. So I just wanted to ask you each too, which is, again, things that you see sort of as obstacles within your Catholic University community when you're doing RJ work on the campus, and just things you may have learned from that you want to invite people to be thinking about as they're moving forward on their campus with this work.
That's a great point. So I think we started here at Donnelly with implementing restorative justice with the faculty and staff, and really to teach them. And at first, the perception was restorative justice is touchy-feely and heartwarming, and that no one has to be accountable for their actions. And until the faculty and staff engaged in circle practices themselves and opened up to the process, and then they understood that it's really healing to understand the cause of the harm, for the person to take responsibility, to say they're sorry and make amends, until they understand that restorative justice has its start in the Indigenous communities, and then they come on board. But it's just overcoming, I think, the perception of what RJ is and what they've heard. But by engaging in it, then we can slowly start to turn the tide on campuses.
Yeah, I agree with Lisa. I think one of the biggest challenges is the knowledge gap. When I first heard about restorative justice, I thought it was fuzzy, new age, ethereal, not tangible. It's the opposite. And I think to really get the message out that it's tremendously effective. It's become a worldwide movement because it's effective, it works. And anybody who's been in a healing circle sees that. We often say it's not a panacea, it's not a cure-all. It isn't applied in every situation. It takes a lot of time. That can be a challenge. It takes a lot of time and a lot of care and a lot of prep work. I've found, interestingly, that lawyers and priests are among the most skeptical of restorative justice. So a buddy of mine who's on our advisory board of our initiative as a Monsignor in a diocese just north of where we are, I won't say where, and he had to skip his study day because we were launching our initiative in September and he wanted to be there in support of, he's on the Indian mission of his diocese. He's pastor there. And one of his priest friends said, well, what about retributive justice? And he told me that, and my response was like, well, yeah, that's shown itself to be so effective in the American context. We're an outlier in prison, violence, guns, lack of rehabilitation, reentry, wherever it is. So that hasn't proven to be all that effective. So trying to get over those kind of hurdles, which sometimes can be ideological bunkers that people are in. And really, as Lisa said, the best way to do that work is to expose people to a restorative practice, and they start to see the effectiveness of it. So yeah, the challenges are there, but boy, conversations like this are so heartening in terms of what can be done.
So ditto to what has already been said. And I also want to preface that what I'm about to say here today is not just from my experience at University of San Diego. This is my fourth Catholic institution. So broadly speaking, yes, I think the knowledge gap is a big challenge. Another piece here is to Father Dan's point that restorative justice it takes time. People's stories take time, and listening and to actually investigate takes time. It takes care. And that can sometimes be challenging as Catholic college, Catholic higher education becomes more and more corporatized. When efficiency becomes a primary value, and we forget the purpose and mission of Catholic education is to form the hearts and minds of human people, to allow a human person to be fully alive. And so to allow a human person to be fully alive takes time, and it's not necessarily efficient. It's very complicated. And so in addition to kind of the knowledge gap and assumptions about it, I think also when people first hear about it, I remember when I went to the training, even as someone who I lean toward it, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like what is this icebreaker about? You know what I mean? Like these things kind of take time that can sometimes rub the opposite direction of cultures that tend to be a little bit more corporate as higher ed becomes more and more professional as it moves forward.
Yeah, I'm resonating with that. So I'm just taking a pause with that one. Yeah, the perception and knowledge gap, the sort of myths and stereotypes, the practice as the antidote, which I thought is really helpful as a reminder, right? To invite our colleagues to practice, and that's a way of breaking that down. And then, Christian, you were just saying about the reality that listening does, and the time, both time and care, and that the pressures of our the economic pressures that a lot of Catholic institutions are under, I think often have people's attention in ways that care does not, and certainly may have been that challenge, I think in some ways is exacerbated right by things like the pandemic and people being separated on campus. Okay, I'm going to pause. So Gwen says we have a question. This is great. So there's multiple questions. I'm just going to look and see. Gwen, did you post it at the bottom of our? Okay. I think the question, oh yeah, this is interesting. So if any of you wanted to respond to the question of how does money, or how do donors play into RJ efforts? And depending on where people are located in your institution, this could be a question that has, if I were to use evaluative language, it could have a positive valence, a negative valence, or some mixture of both. But yeah, thank you for that question. So I'll just invite you all to respond as you see fit, if you'd like to answer that.
Well, Kansas City, Kansas, Donnelly is also a diocesan college, and our Archdiocese of Kansas City, Kansas has an office of restorative justice. And I think that sets the tone for our college. So we know that we have their support. We fall under the auspices of the Archdiocese, and we know that if we start an initiative on campus, our board is behind us because Archbishop Naumann, of course, is on our board of directors. So I think that the tone has to start with the captain of the ship and have it trickle down. But again, we want everyone to understand what restorative justice is. We don't want to say you have to do this. We just want them to be engaged. And like Father Daniel said, it's understanding what it is and the impact it can have on our campus and with our students, especially since we exist in a high crime area, teaching our students that they shouldn't seek revenge. Revenge doesn't heal. And we have a student who comes on campus and tells us that they were harmed off campus. It doesn't make them sleep at night knowing their offender was caught. They need to heal from the harm. So I think having support from your donors and from your board of director does set that tone for you to move forward in the process.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things that Lisa noted is Kansas City, San Diego, and I think the Twin Cities are both really kind of emerging. San Diego is emerged, but both Kansas City and Minneapolis, St. Paul are emerging. And so you're seeing this both at the university level and at the diocesan level. And so there is strong support. Having said that, you know, when I was appointed liaison for restorative justice and healing, there was no money in the Archdiocese for that position. And there was for another position. And so that was a challenge and remains a challenge. One of the challenges we have in our university is the culture is very proprietary with regard to donors. And I think, and I love St. Thomas, I love the leaders. That's been the way it's been for years and years and years. But I think there's a lack of institutional freedom that we seek individually. And part of the Catholic tradition is freedom for the good. And I think there needs to be more of that in the institution. And, you know, it's been challenging as Julie and I have launched this initiative. I think there's donors who would be very supportive, but to be able to even have that conversation, you have to go through layers and layers of bureaucracy, which can be a challenge in the university setting. So we do have leaders who are very supportive of restorative justice, but looking for more opportunities to be able to have that work funded. And I think telling stories about how this impacts real lives and fosters greater justice and healing are things that donors would really be moved by, because they know that their funding is making a difference.
Christian, I know you kicked us off in some sense with this, but did you have any more you wanted to add in regard to this question?
Oh, that's great. I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So yes, I'm hearing there's sort of the idea of the formal authority, like Lisa was describing, right? The sort of captain of the ship, and then sort of by extension, what Dan is describing, I think, is the idea, right, that while we can do a lot of good with donors funding, that also when you have to, I think, as most of us do, right, navigate both a bureaucratic structure, right, which many higher ed institutions are, and also trying to think about how people have kind of tried to manage the resources and funding that are available and how that can make people feel nervous, right, if someone's encroaching. And so thinking, yeah, really strategically about how we do that approach so that it's collaborative. And I think that that's been something else we've been, I know in our conversations more broadly on the Restorative Justice Network, trying to understand, you know, for different campus communities, you know, what are the needs and how can we help folks, you know, to meet those needs. And obviously funding and infrastructure support can be one of them. And also that sometimes, and I know, because I'm more familiar, for example, with University of San Diego's program, that you all have a lot of really interesting RJ projects that have kind of sprung up in different places very organically. So how I imagine it on your campus. I don't want to speak for you, but that's as an outsider, my observation. sometimes people see restorative justice only as an opportunity for students. I think that's a really, really important point to lift up. And I'll just putting on my research hat for a moment. I work with colleagues who are both RJ practitioners and also transformative justice practitioners. And what I observe with my TJ colleagues is that there's a lot of, because of very important, historical roots in BIPOC communities that developed transformative justice practices, there's a lot of really sophisticated, not just analysis of power structures and power differentials and injustices in institutions, but also a lot of attending to who are the people and the positions that have positional authority to influence the culture of a given campus. And I think there's a number of projects around the United States. My own area of research has a lot been on sexual violence on campuses. And so my colleague, Dr. Xerxes Mendez, has done a lot of work really with faculty. So trying to think about how do you help faculty, right, to talk to each other, to build relationships, and to be able to engage each other, right, in a challenging way, particularly when you're looking at issues around things like campus sexual harassment, and using circle practice and other practices, building like TJ pods to help people be accountable, build a community sense of accountability to their peers. And that work I think is really powerful. So I really appreciate people mentioning, and Tanya, thank you in particular for mentioning the thing of the narrowest focus on only having a student opportunity. And then also the idea that sometimes there can be resistance because, again, I think our panelists kind of spoke to this, the idea of sort of specific domains. So if the folks in student conduct feel like it's their domain, they wouldn't want people doing trainings. So thank you so much for lifting that up. Yeah. And I wonder, we have a question here in the chat also, and I'll open it up to the panelists. Thinking about how do you address the question of perception, again, of restorative justice, particularly in predominantly white institutions. And I think, and this is a really, I think, important question, right? Because the question of when are restorative processes offered in the aftermath of harm? And again, I'll just say from my lens that I know because Title IX is such a formal process, the sort of regulations that govern it are very specific and controlled. I know we have Amber Monroe on the call, not no pressure, Amber, but just noting we have some experts on the call on this, that the way that RJ gets implemented would be different than, for example, in a bias incident where the regulatory environment isn't as robust. And I understand it can leave students, particularly BIPOC students, feeling like the people who do harm, who do racially motivated hate crimes on campus or bias incidents, more likely to be able to receive a restorative process, or someone's call them sanctions, but restorative process, and someone who's governed, for example, by potentially like the campus Title IX process. So I wonder if, I know that's a complicated topic, but I wonder if our panelists, it's an important one. So I wonder if any of our panelists wanted to respond about kind of how is RJ offered and to whom and under what, conditions and circumstances, because it could be understandably perceived that depending on what the issue is you're talking about, that BIPOC students are not selected as recipients in the way that white students might be. And I think that's a really important, concern to address. So I'll just pause and check in with any of you to see if that was something you wanted to respond to or that you've observed on your campus as an issue. And just while our panelists are thinking, I'm appreciating, thank you so much, Sean Horrigan, for naming the work that you're doing at USD, right? So thinking about how do we think about RJ processes, supporting the needs of those who have been harmed, and in particular, how are we, particularly for folks who are in predominantly white institutions, or like me, an institution where the administration is predominantly white, but students are predominantly students of color, the idea that it's really, really important, right, to be thinking about how are we supporting the needs of particularly BIPOC students, centering their needs within our processes. So thank you so much for that, Sean. Again, just pausing and checking with our panelists just to see if there was any additional response to that.
And the only thing I would say, it's quite complex. So I don't, my hesitation is not to a lack of an answer, but to provide something simple for a complex situation. To your point, Sean, I think you're right. It goes back to something that we talked about in the panel about the assumptions about restorative justice. I think there's a particular assumption that BIPOC students have in terms of what justice looks like when it often involves people who don't identify as white. I'm wondering, this is a wonder now, not an answer to the question. That sounds like something that would require a justice circle in and of itself. What does racial inequity look like at a university? How are those conversations being had? Are there people in the university who have had a conduct outcome that they thought was unjust? And does that require healing? And does that require a justice circle in and of itself? So this is where I think that to your point, Sheila, you were talking about that garden metaphor, that these circles need to be happening in a variety of places on campus. I think there's a different issue here of not just an outcome of conduct, but what BIPOC students are experiencing, what injustices, with all the greatest intents of a university, what injustices still exist, and how are those being voiced?
Yeah, no, I also think this is a complex question and reality, and I think really requires a lot of thought and kind of soul searching. One book that I would recommend that maybe a number of you have already dug into or read, which doesn't direct to my knowledge directly to the university setting, but Colorizing Restorative Justice, Voicing Our Realities. It's out of a publishing house in the Twin Cities. Cheryl Wilson, who's on our advisory board, wrote a terrific chapter in the book. And I think it really, I think is a real call to all folks to be really attentive to inequities that are just absolutely throughout all of our systems of power, and to acknowledge that in a way of transform, as my colleague says in the theology department at St. Thomas, restorative justice needs to move to transformative justice. It's not meant to, stories are critical, but it's really meant to move us to transform all unjust social structures, including in ones that are so integrated and systemic that we don't even pause to either understand or acknowledge them. So I wish I had more of an answer, but it's clearly an issue, and one that requires a lot of intentionality and listening.
Yeah, and I think what I've heard from all of you throughout our conversation today is the willingness to be transformed, right? So not just that we're doing this work on behalf of others, but we're doing it with others, and that we are part of that transformation. And I think that I know for me on my own journey, both individually as personally, but also as a professor, that it's been a really incredible opportunity to do exactly what you're saying, right? To have that pause, to reflect, and then also to really be having my own reckoning with, are the things that I'm doing, are these reinscribing the harm, right, that we say we stand against, and pausing enough to really be open to that feedback, especially from our students, but from our colleagues as well. And that when we hear that, to be in a space of just gratitude that people are willing to be honest, and then if that's an opportunity, right, again, to, as Christian was saying, I think the opportunity that there's a lot of circle work, right, that could happen. So being able to think about our repairs and then how we take responsibility for our part is so powerful in moving our communities forward in a way that moves toward healing, toward justice, and toward the living into the missions as our institutions have described and defined them. So thank you so much for that. So Gwen is reminding me about the time, which is very helpful because I'm looking at multiple screens. So I just want to pause thinking about our panelists and thinking about next steps. and wanting to just first say thank you so much to our panelists for being here today, for offering your wisdom and being in conversation. And just wanted to open, if there was anything that any of you wanted to share in closing. So I'll just go through the order that we had established, the rhythm we have had. So I'll turn to you first, Lisa, just to see if there was anything you wanted to say by way of closing.
I do, Father Dan, and to Christian, thank you very much for your thoughts on this topic. And I think it's important work that we continue to have these conversations for Catholic colleges and universities. It's just important to know where people are headed, what direction, and that we have this common theme and a desire to implement restorative justice on our campuses. So thank you. And thank you to the participants for taking the time today to share your thoughts with us. Deeply appreciated.
Yeah, and I echo my thank you to all of you, to Sheila for moderating the panel, and Lisa and Christian to be with you. So we're part of a broken, wounded nation, a wounded church, including self-inflicted wounds for those who are Catholic. And out of all of that, the ashes, there is this incredible restorative justice tradition and a beautiful Catholic tradition. And there's such potential and dynamism, which we've seen when the two come together. And so I would just encourage all of us to really lean into that opportunity and potential to really be instruments of light and justice and healing in a nation and in a church that needs all of it. And so I just draw a lot of inspiration from all of you, from the work that you do, the work in the university setting, and really will take that with me in my heart and in our collective work together.
Likewise, thank you to everyone, to the panelists, to the organizers, to all those who are here. I ditto much as what has been said. All I will add is I'm walking away today with a greater imagination. I'm looking at the comments and I'm reading through some of the things that people have shared, truth and reconciliation abroad to specific things that are happening in the university. The application of this is endless, and the need is also endless. And so the possibilities and the imagination that's been cultivated, I'm grateful for today.